Hey everyone, welcome back. You ever get that feeling like you're kind of stuck in the middle of something, like in a rut? It's messy, things are uncertain. You know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive into this whole idea, this messy middle thing. We're looking at a presentation by Stephen Johnson. He was speaking at the Freedom Outpost. And let me tell you, he had some seriously interesting things to say about not just surviving these messy times, but using them to grow.
Yeah, it's not just about getting through it, right? It's about how you come out the other side. And that's what Johnson really gets at. He highlights how important our response is to these times, these challenges, and the way he brings in like biblical references along with these really practical insights.
Yeah.
Really cool.
I know. It's a really unique approach. One of the first things that kind of hit me was this whole thing about the number 11.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about how, in the Bible, 11 often represents this disorder that eventually leads to a new order.
Right. Like it's this necessary chaos. Like you got to go through that to get to a whole new level.
Exactly. And you see this pattern throughout the Bible,
Yeah.
periods of just crazy instability, even just straight up chaos. And then bam, huge growth or transformation comes out of it.
Yeah.
And brings up Joseph. Now, his path to leadership, there's a whole other kind of messy, betrayal, slavery, false accusation.
He's been through it all.
He really did.
Yeah, and it's interesting because his story really shows how those messy middles can actually be part of something way bigger, maybe even God's plan. It's not always going to be pretty, that's for sure. And it definitely doesn't feel good when you're going through it. But looking back, I think a lot of us can see how those challenges shaped us, how they kind of got us ready and ultimately led us to where we were supposed to be.
Exactly.
Mm.
Like, it's all about choice, isn't it?
Mm.
We can either let those experiences completely break us, or we can look at them and think, okay, this is rough, but I'm going to learn from this. Maybe we don't understand it at the time, but we can choose to believe it's an opportunity for growth.
I think that's such a key point. It's that mindset shift. Are we going to be a victim or are we going to find a way to grow from this? And I love how Johnson uses that analogy of the kayaker navigating the rapids. He says, you're not really paddling to move forward. You're paddling to kind of stay balanced, stay stable in the middle of all that craziness.
Yeah.
And trusting that the current's going to carry you through.
Yeah. It's about letting go of that need to control everything.
Absolutely. And having that faith in the process, even when it feels totally out of control.
I love that visual. So how do we actually do that? How do we change our perspective to see those messy middles as something other than just a really bad time we have to endure?
Well, Johnson brings in some really practical advice from, believe it or not, the business world. He pulls from this book called The Messy Middle, and he talks about perseverance, self-awareness, and even just focusing on what's working, even when it feels like your whole world is falling apart.
So it's not just like slapping on a happy face and hoping for the best.
No, there's real stuff we can do, things we can control to navigate those rough patches more effectively. It's about building resilience, bouncing back, learning from our slip-ups, and being able to adapt to all the changes that are thrown at us. Johnson emphasizes that the messy middle isn't about failing, it's about using it as fuel for learning and growing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how important it is, how we respond to these messy middle moments. It's not just about what happens, it's how we react to it, what we decide to learn from it. Yeah. But how does this whole thing connect back to, our regular lives, outside of work, outside of business?
Well, Johnson actually gets really personal here. He tells a story about this major career disappointment he had while working overseas. He talks about feeling totally lost and discouraged. Like everything he'd worked for had just crumbled, like a textbook messy middle experience, right?
Yeah, so he's overseas, his career hits a wall, he's feeling lost. That's got to be rough.
Yeah.
But didn't he say something about messy middles leading to personal growth?
Yeah, and that's exactly how it played out for him. It's actually kind of cool how he talks about that period, as a catalyst for transformation. He was forced to reevaluate everything, his priorities, his relationships, even his sense of purpose. It wasn't fun, that's for sure, but it led him down a path he never would have imagined otherwise. And honestly, he ended up with a deeper sense of calling.
Okay, so these shakeups, they can push us in a better direction sometimes, even if it feels terrible at the time. But how does this tie back to that biblical stuff, with the number 11 and the whole disorder leading to reorder thing?
He brings up the tribe of Gashur.
Okay.
They're associated with certain blessings in the Bible. And he focuses specifically on this idea of, as your days, so shall your strength be.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that before. but I never really thought about it in the context of like going through a messy middle. How does he make that connection?
Well, he explains it like this. God gives us the strength we need for each specific day, not this like lump sum to carry us through the whole messy middle all at once.
Okay.
It's like every morning we wake up with a fresh supply of strength, and it's specifically tailored for whatever we're facing that day.
That's pretty encouraging, actually. It means like we don't have to face today's challenges with yesterday's strength or worry about tomorrow's burdens.
Right. You just focus on what's right in front of you. You've got what you need for today, and that's got to be enough.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's this other pastor, Ray Pritchard, he kind of adds to this idea by saying that God's strength is there for us no matter how we're feeling.
Oh, interesting.
Like whether you're feeling joyful and energized or just totally down and discouraged, his strength is still there. It's constant.
So it's not like we have to, I don't know, force ourselves to be positive or something, to like conjure up the strength.
No, it's about recognizing that the strength we need comes from somewhere else entirely. It's outside of ourselves.
Right.
And both Johnson and Pritchard, they emphasize that it's not just for some of our days, This strength is there for all of them, every single one.
Okay.
We'll run out of days before we run out of God's strength.
Wow, that's really powerful. It's a good reminder that even when things are crazy, when we're feeling overwhelmed and lost, we're not alone. But it's one thing to hear these encouraging words, It's another to actually apply them in our own lives.
Yeah, and Johnson, he actually encourages us to kind of take a step back and really look at our own paths. Like, think back to those specific times when we hit a messy middle.
Right.
Those moments where we felt like we were totally off track, or maybe even like we'd completely derailed.
So we shouldn't just try to forget about those hard times. We should intentionally go back and revisit them. Why is that so important?
Because he asks us to think about how we reacted to those challenges.
Okay.
How did they change us? Did they put us on a different path? How did they shape who we are today? And where did we see God in those moments? It's about digging deep and finding the lessons, recognizing the growth that happened, even if it was painful.
It's funny. Sometimes we try so hard to just move on from the tough stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe we're missing out on the things they could teach us.
I think that's exactly right. And for anyone who's feeling stuck in a messy middle right now, Johnson has some pretty tough questions.
Cool.
He asks, are there any wounds that still need healing? Is there forgiveness we need to offer? Maybe even to ourselves. Is there something we need to repent of, or maybe a different direction we need to take?
He's really asking us to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying that sometimes if we don't deal with those messy middle experiences, they can actually hold us back.
Right.
But he also reminds us of this really important truth. God can use even the hardest, most painful experiences for good. And he uses the story of Joseph and his brothers to show this.
Oh, yeah, how Joseph's brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery. But then he ends up saving them during a famine. I mean, talk about a crazy, messy middle.
It's wild, right? And when those brothers came to him for help, Joseph could have easily gotten revenge.
Yeah.
But he chose to forgive them. He saw the bad stuff they did, but he also recognized that God had used it for a bigger purpose. It's a powerful example of how even the most awful experiences can be redeemed.
It's a good reminder that even though the pain is real and the hurt other people cause is real, there's always that possibility for healing, for growth, and even for redemption.
I think that's so important to remember, but Johnson's also honest about the fact that messy middles, they're often just unavoidable. They're part of the process, part of becoming more like Christ. It's how we move from one level of spiritual maturity to the next.
So it's not about avoiding the mess. It's about understanding that it's often part of the journey.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's easy, Shane.
Nope, not at all. And he uses this image, about being hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed.
Okay, that's a lot. What's he getting at with all of that?
I think he's reminding us that being a Christian, it's not always a walk in the park. It's going to be full of challenges and struggles.
Right.
But it's in those tough moments when we're being tested and under pressure that our faith is made stronger and our character is shaped.
Okay, so when those messy middles show up, and it sounds like they will, what's the best way to handle them?
Johnson says to take a deep breath, and instead of freaking out or trying to escape, just ask, God, what are you trying to teach me through this?
So it's about shifting our perspective, right?
Yes.
Like instead of focusing on just surviving the mess, we got to look at it as a chance to grow.
Exactly. And he brings up that question that Jesus asked the paralyzed man, do you want to be well? It's easy to say yes, but are we really willing to look at the stuff that might be holding us back?
Wow.
The beliefs, the behaviors, all of it.
That's a good question to think about. Because sometimes our messy middles are less about what's going on around us and more about what's going on inside of us.
Right. We've got to be able to identify those limiting beliefs, those unhealthy patterns, and let God do some deep work in our hearts and minds.
So it's not about just toughing it out. It's about letting ourselves be changed by the process. But honestly, that can be really hard.
Yeah, and Johnson even admits to that. He talks about being drawn to things that seemed perfect, like the ideal kingdom model. But then they crumble or fall apart. He was chasing this perfect vision, and it just kept leading to disappointment.
So even someone who talks about embracing the mess, they could still struggle with it themselves.
Totally, we're all human, right? But through those experiences, he learned something really important. It wasn't about finding the perfect model or achieving some kind of outward success. It was about letting God shape his heart, his character, his soul.
So it's about the journey, not the destination.
Exactly. That's where the real power of embracing the messy middle is. It's about letting go, trusting God's plan, and letting him mold us and shape us with his love. And that leads us to Johnson's final point, and probably his most challenging one.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, talking about how important it is to really pay attention to how we respond when we're in those messy middle situations, those times when things are just tough. And how sometimes those are the times when we can actually grow the most. But you were saying Johnson has this one last point that's maybe the most challenging.
Right, yeah. He has this line where he reminds us that our souls are, and I'm quoting here, on loan and they're coming due.
Wow, that really makes you think, what does he mean by that?
It's a pretty powerful thought, right? It kind of forces us to think about how we're using our time, our energy, even our very essence, Yeah. Are we living in a way that honors God, that shows his love to the people around us?
Yeah, it definitely puts things into perspective, especially when we're going through something hard, something difficult. Are we letting those experiences, make us bitter? Or do they soften us, make us more understanding? Do we get more cynical, or do we choose to offer grace to ourselves and to other people?
That's the question, isn't it? Because in the end, what really matters isn't about achievements or how successful we seem on the outside. It's about the state of our hearts, what's going on inside.
So Johnson just kind of drops this heavy idea on us and then leaves us hanging. Right?
No, actually, he doesn't. He gives us a challenge, a call to action, really. He says that we should look at those messy middles not as obstacles to avoid, but as opportunities for growth, to change. He actually wants us to celebrate the craziness, to embrace the mess, because he knows that God is working in it all.
So instead of dreading those times when things are messy, we should kind of approach them with, I don't know, maybe a little bit of curiosity, even excitement. Like, okay, God, what are you up to here? What am I supposed to learn?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're in a messy middle right now, just remember, you're not going through it alone. God's right there with you, offering you his strength, his guidance, and his love. It never goes away. Embrace the mess, trust the process, and let God do what he does best.